Blending and composite modes. If you work on DaVinci, you've seen them. There's about 32 of them. If you're more of a graphic designer or an illustrator, you've seen them as well. There's about, depending on the software you use, I think Photoshop has about 33. The software I use, Affinity Design and Affinity Photo, has about 32. They are universal. These are concepts. These are plugins that are universal throughout digital media. Let's talk about it. First things first, what is blending or compositing? Blending or compositing is when you have two or more layers and you combine them together to get a new result. Not to be confused with composition. Compositing is different to composition. Composition is the arrangement of your subject within an image. So for example, in this talking head, I'm composed dead center of the frame versus being composed off of the third of the frame. That's composition. Compositing speaks to the stuff that we are made of, materials, what something is made of, but in a more digital sense. Compositing talks to the layer or the canvas that your image is comprised of. So that is what a composite is. Composite versus composition. To compose versus to composite. And so technically, a blend mode is basically a mathematical instruction that tells your computer what to do with pixels of different layers. And so within our case, we have a blend layer that is blended with a base layer. And so there are different ways in which you can combine those layers, and that operation in how those layers are combined is called the blending mode or the composite mode. Now, it is important to remember that every image is comprised of a pixel, and each pixel works based on a color space. And so what the blend mode does is it tells how each pixel of an image to behave based on the layers that are applied to it. So regardless of the color space that you're working with, the principle is still the same. So for our purposes, we are working in RGB. We're working in RGB. RGB means red, green, blue. Those are the specific channels that comprise basically all the colors that you will see on the screen. And so for each of those three channels, values are normalized between 0 and 1. And so 0 gives you no information, which typically gives you back, and building up all the way to 1 gives you full input. And so for each channel, the values are 0 to 1. 0 being black because there's no input, and 1 being red, green, or blue because that's maximum input. And so combining red, green, blue and at equal values will give you white or different variations of gray. And so for this video, I don't just want to talk about what the blend modes do. I also want to dive a little bit into how each blend mode works, the mathematical operations behind it, because I'm a geek like that. But yeah, without any further ado, let's get right into it. There's approximately 32 different individual composite modes that you can apply. But an easier way to understand and remember them is that they're grouped into groups. And so in total there are 6 groups. Those groups being normal, lighten, darken, contrast, inversion, and component. And so understanding these groups is the first step, because if you understand what each group does, each of the individual composite modes within the specific groups provide similar results. They do not provide the same results, but they provide similar results. And so if you're looking to let's say, for argument's sake, if you're looking to lighten your image based off of these composite modes, then you'll understand Uguti, okay, instead of browsing and searching between each individual mode and seeing a preview of what each mode does, you can just refer to the group and then take it from there. But yeah, let's dive into each of these groups. The first group is your normal group. Your normal group basically does nothing. It just exists. It just exists there. And so differences within your normal group are only made through changing the opacity. And so changing in the opacity makes the second layer, the base layer on top of the blend layer, visible based on the level of opacity. I believe that is straightforward. Depending on the software you're using, you may have this blend mode. Some softwares don't have the blend mode. That's called Dissolve. It also falls under the normal category in that it works similar to the normal blend mode, and that it just replaces random pixels based on how intensely you apply it. So instead of getting a gradual fade from opaque to transparent, I hope I'm using those words correctly, you rather get a random random rearrangement of each individual pixel. So DaVinci Resolve does not have a dissolve composite mode, but rather uses it as a video transition. So there's multiple variations of dissolve transitions within DaVinci Resolve. Things like cross dissolve, blur dissolve, so on and so forth. Okay, second category, talking about lightening, the lighten category. And so the lighten category has 4 blend modes: lighten, screen, color dodge, and linear dodge. Your lighten simply chooses the brighter pixel between your blend layer and your base layer. Simple enough. What your screen does is that it brightens your whites while killing out your blacks. Color dodge is used for focusing on your highlights, though be careful in that it can blow out things very dramatic. And linear dodge is simple. Value of pixel A plus value of pixel B gives you the resulting image, and so that's how it makes things lighter. Be careful with linear operations in that if the resultant value goes above 1, that can cause clipping into your image, basically blowing out of your highlights. Okay, third category. Third category is darken. What does darken do? Say it with me, class. It makes the image dark. And so within the darken category, you have 4 composite modes: darken, multiply, color burn, and linear burn. And so darken is straightforward, chooses the darker values between your blend layer and your base layer. Multiply works inversely to screen in that it multiplies the values of the blend layer and the base layer. The result will always be a lower value provided that your values are lower than 1. Color burn mainly focuses on the darker values. So it increases your contrast by making the darker values darker. It also adds more saturation into your linear burn. Gives similar result to multiply, except it's darker. It's a value of pixel A, value of pixel B, and then subtract 1 to that, and that will always give you a darker result. Now let's talk about contrast. Contrast is relatively simple once you understand. What contrasting is basically pushing your values of the highlights higher and pushing the values of your darks lower. And so this contrast between the values of your highlights and the values of your lowlights or your dark colors gives you that contrast look. And so each of these modes in their application divide your pixels into highlights and lowlights. Basically, pixel values higher than 50%. So pixel values higher than 0.5 are considered as highlights, and pixel values lower than 0.5 are considered as shadows, darks, lowlights. And so what these modes do is that they apply different operations to the highlights and the lowlights to give you that contrasted look. And so within the contrast category, you have 7 composite modes. Overlay does 2 operations in one. It applies the multiply, it applies the multiply composite modes in the shadows while applying the screen composite modes within the highlights, and that gives you the overlay operation. Soft light is a bit more complicated in that there are varied applications from software to software. Each software applies its own proprietary formula in terms of how they apply the operation. But basically what it operates as is a softer version of an overlay operation, and such it gives you more natural results. Hot light works exactly like overlay, except that the roles of your pixel A and pixel B are inversed. So it's basically an inversion of hard light. And so multiply is applied in the highlights and screen is applied in the shadows. Next we have vivid light. Vivid light applies a burn operation in your shadows, and it applies a dodge operation in your highlights. Linear light basically it's a linear operation, but it adds the value of your B, your base layer, to the value of your A, your plane layer, and then adds 1 on top of that. And so your intensity or how much it is applied will depend very much on your plane layer. Pin light gives you very harsh results, as what it does basically is replace the pixel values within your highlight shadows, and it also replaces the pixel values within your harsh shadows. And so pin light will generally give you a very harsh effect. Hot mix is an interesting one. What hot mix does is basically, if you can imagine within your image is comprised of differing values of each color channel, so different variations of red, blue, and green. And so what hot mix does is it takes those variations of reds, greens, and blues and pushes them either full zero or full 1. So you will depending on the intensity of application, your image will go from having many colors to having 6 colors based on the color channel, or will have 3 colors. So it basically posterizes your image if you've seen a posterized filter. Next group is inversion. What inversion does is it inverts. Think that negative filter, and does is subtract or inverts pixels. Inversion has 4 groups. Those 4 groups are difference, exclusion, subtract, and divide. Difference basically subtracts the pixel values of your plane layer and your base layer and takes the absolute value of that value and applies it to your resulting layer. Exclusion works similarly to difference, but gives you a softer result, so it is less harsh and less dramatic. Subtract takes the difference of your base layer and your plane layer, and so the result will be the remaining value. Divide basically divides the value of your base layer to the value of your blend layer. And last but not least, we have the component blend group. Component blending is, I think, the simplest and most basic to understand, that it doesn't require any fancy math to get behind it. But basically it targets or only affects the hue, saturation, and the luminance value of your image. And so within the component layer we have 4 groups. We have hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. And so what the hue composite mode does is it takes the hue from your blend layer but keeps the saturation and the luminance from your base layer. The saturation composite mode, as you can imagine, takes the saturation from your blend layer, keeps the luminance and the hue from your base layer. The color layer takes the hue and saturation from your blend layer but keeps the luminance of the base layer. And last but not least, luminosity from your blend layer but keeps the saturation and the hue of your blend layer. And so yeah, that's about it. And so that is basically briefly an overview of all the different blend modes that you would have. And yeah, understanding that each blend mode or composite mode fits into groups will make life easier for you in terms of being intentional on what blend mode you want to apply on your image, instead of just opening the blend modes and then just scrolling and looking for the result that looks good based off of the preview. You can actually plan beforehand and do intentional edits based on your knowledge, because now you're clever. Yeah, very clever. This is, of course, a brief overview, tip of the iceberg, if you will, in that there are specific use cases and there are specific results and cool results that you can get from knowing how to use each of the blend modes creatively and in the proper way. And yeah, for this video, I've yapped on long enough. If you want a more in-depth breakdown on when to use each blend mode, what each blend mode is used for with practical examples, let me know there, right there below the like button. But yeah, other than that, if there's anything else that you would like to see or something that you like to cover, you like me to cover, let me know. Otherwise, thank you for your time. I'll see you guys on the next one. Ciao.
Seven.